Mr. Speaker. Thank you. My first question to the sponsors of the bill, Mr. Speaker, is we see that this sub-bill actually requires three standards. The first standard is basically Common Core for a year. The second standard is the Massachusetts standard for 2 years, and I would ask LSC if we could get a copy of the Massachusetts standard and if there are any supporting documentation of that. But the third standard is the new Ohio standard. That won't be until 2017. My question, aside from how much it's going to cost to put forward three separate standards, is why are certain things specified and what is the basis for the specification? For example, the social studies texts will include the Constitution of the United States and its amendments with emphasis on the Bill of Rights. So the emphasis is not going to be on the document, it's not going to be on 11 through 27, some of which I think are very important, like voting rights and the end of slavery, things like that. But just on the first 10, that I think shows a bit of a bias, which are our favorite amendments, which ones aren't. But more troubling to me is the scientific standards, which include a focus on academic and scientific knowledge rather than scientific processes. And the reason I'm concerned about that is because knowing that there are 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom in water doesn't really show anything, but learning how to figure that out, learning that scientific process allows you to become someone who studies science, technology, engineering, math, and medicine, which is important for our economic future. So I'm wondering why the specificity on those types of subjects? Why are we picking certain things and not picking others? And why, particularly in the science thing, are we frankly shying away from this down?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Gentleman from Washington County. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Ramos. When Common Core came in, they chose 2 subject areas in order to avoid being political, apparently. English language arts and mathematics. And even within those areas, you have a lot of dispute about what constitutes the best way to pursue knowledge. These other areas, as you would probably concede, social studies, science, and some of the others are much more political by their nature. And as Leader Hurd was talking about, that's a concern, and that's something that's going to have to be discussed. My sense in this language was an attempt to, as much as possible, try to depoliticize each of those, where people present a theory that's politically popular at the time, but it may not necessarily be backed by scientific underpinnings. Now, again, I didn't write these. I mean, I'm aware of this and I'm understanding the context of this, but in terms of standards that have been effective in the past, that language is trying to address that concern that we do get into a political debate rather than trying to teach what everybody agrees are the basic underpinnings of science knowledge and knowledge of social studies and everywhere else. Again, at the local level, there's going to be more decisions made in terms of textbooks and things like that, I suspect, and people will have those debates, and hopefully that would be a very healthy process for them to do at the local levels, because they could decide different things based in Lorraine and perhaps Marietta or someplace else. But that would be my answer, Representative Hubbard.
Speaker Batchelor, Representative Ramos, I agree with you on the constitutional aspect. I mean, I guess I certainly would approve of your amendment with adding the specificity as the top amendments. There's little knowledge about the first 7 articles of the Constitution, in particular Article 5 of the Constitution, which allows state legislatures to control the federal government by amending the Constitution, which, as you know, I've been working on for the past 7 years. And of course, there are in the next 17 amendments after the first 10 amendments, there are some that are very important, especially the 13th and 14th amendments that talk about equal protection, due process of law, which of course a lawyer's delight in terms of those things. Some of those aren't as important, like we repealed prohibition. Well, everybody knows that, I think. So I think my guess is the drafters of that thought that the first 10 amendments, there's plenty there to talk about, and they interact often with our daily lives. In terms of freedom of speech and freedom of the press and all of those things. So I agree with you. I don't think there should be an emphasis in studying the Constitution just in the first 10 amendments. So I don't know if that answered all your, you had several points, but I want to make it.
Follow, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman?
Follow, Mr. Speaker.
Indeed, Lord,
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. That's very helpful. I too am a fan of the Fifth Amendment as my constitutional amendment to allow us to actually control our election system. You're both welcome to join on that. But the fifth article. I apologize.
Oh, Article 5.
I also have an Article
Fifth
5.
Amendment is, you can't make me talk.
Well, I
was wondering why he was a fan of that.
Article 5 convention. Anyway, my question, Mr. Speaker, to the sponsors is about Section 330107.8b, which basically says Board of Education shall not adopt the English language mathematics developed by the Common Core. But my question is about the end of that sentence, which basically says, or any similar initiative, process, or program. That is very vague. I think that you speak about lawyers alike. I think that will be anytime anybody disagrees with anything we do in education, they'll point to this. But I'm worried about it. If you don't like Common Core, that's one thing, but what this bill actually does because of that is it prevents the state from talking to anybody, from using any systems or standards that are based in something that other states have done or other organizations have done. I think it would prevent us from talking to CSG, NCSL, or the American Legislative Exchange Council. I think it might prevent us from using Massachusetts' standards. So my question is why, if your aim is to not use the Common Core standards, why also say, or any other standards in any other group of people that have ever worked on that isn't the people in this room? Because that's basically what it is.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman may proceed.
Representative Ramos, my understanding, again, in talking with LSC, is that we don't inhibit our ability to have the Massachusetts standards. And what this was attempting to address was the desire to disguise what were the Common Core standards under a different name or a different banner. You look at what happened in Indiana. Indiana supposedly repealed Common Core, and then they went right back and wrote the same thing under a different name. So the concern here was sleight of hand by bureaucrats or other folks to try to adopt the same thing under a different banner, and there is a concern there. It does not inhibit our ability to look at other standards. By my understanding, I guess LSC, I don't know if they want to weigh in on this, but in drafting this, it was, again, that Common Core itself, Common Core's first cousin, Common Core's mother-in-law, those things which are directly related, or by marriage, to Common Core, to ensure that we didn't, somehow fool ourselves in the process. Because this is a concern. The concerns that are related about Common Core are real and legitimate. The concerns about the breakers that have been put in place to inhibit the ability to get rid of Common Core, the millions of dollars that have been spent to promote Common Core or to temper opposition to Common Core, these are all concerns. And the money factor that Representative Huffman spoke about is significant. I'm just a small business owner from Marietta who happens to be in the legislature. But I think as somebody whose grandmother taught for 37 years, whose wife is currently a public school teacher, whose kids have gone to both public and private schools, this matters. This matters to parents, and we often talk here in Columbus about systems all the time. The system this and the system did that. It's really about kids, teachers, and we want that, as I said in my testimony, we want to restore as much as we can the joy of teaching that a lot of people went into this profession for, which is diminished, no doubt, by the ratcheting up all the time of testing and everything. We want accountability, but we want teachers to be turned on and excited about what they do. And I think this program, this initiative, as it was structured and as it's being implemented, is taking a lot of joy away. I think you would find that, you'll hear that from teachers who are going to be testifying here, but I think you would find that to be relatively widespread across the board in the state of Ohio in a way that maybe the legislature did not know. But I've certainly, as the sponsor of this bill, I've heard a lot about it.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Ramos, if there's some suggested language to provide clarity to that topic, there's long before Common Core, there are lots of national organizations. I used to, as the president of the Latin Club, we used to go to the Junior Classical League national conventions, and part of it, the Latin teachers would get together and talk about how they would teach better and what should be in fourth-year Latin versus first-year Latin and all of those things. And it made the teachers that participated in that better teachers and students better students. So certainly there are going to be a lot of places that our Department of Education and our state school board can draw information from. But we'll know that. We'll know where the information came from because we'll be sitting there talking to them about it. And they'll be explaining it to us at probably a lot of local meetings, but perhaps education committee meetings. And it's really that one additional step removal, significant step removal, that prevents that. So I don't think that this is meant to be, don't talk to anybody unless they, are resident of the state of Ohio, not by any stretch, because there are a lot of national organizations that are education, teacher-based organizations that could help with this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Beatty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Speaker Pro Tem Huffman and Representative Thompson. You talked about flexibility a lot in your testimony, and Mr. Speaker, gentlemen, I'd like to know, have you given any consideration to or had any discussions, I can't find it in the legislation yet, regarding waivers for high-performing schools from all this stuff? High graduation rate, high attendance, high performance on testing. The schools that are really doing a good job, if you thought about giving them relief from, over the years, the increased amount of testing, and evaluations, and all the hassle that's preventing productivity in the classroom, have you thought about that or would consider it?
Mr. Speaker, Representative Beatty, I appreciate that suggestion. I think it's certainly something we could consider. We didn't address it in the bill, but one of the things that we do want to address long term is there are schools that outperform these standards significantly, both public and private, and how best do you account for that? How best do you reward excellent performance in that sense, rather than putting everybody in the same pool and not rewarding that. One of the bills that I did in my tenure was the agreed upon procedures, and that was local audits to give people relief of reduced audits if they performed well financially. So I get what you're saying there. I like that concept. If you've got a proposed something that we could do to make the bill better, I would welcome it.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Beatty, I want to echo what Representative Thompson said. I think it's something that, when we talk about the expense, especially at the local level, many times these things just aren't necessary. And I've already been approached by an organization that represents only high-performing private schools who don't think they should be doing any testing because 90% of their kids go to some Ivy League school or something like that. The only concern I have about that is, and there's really two sides to this, is even in the school that is high-performing, there are kids who aren't. And just as in schools that are low-performing, there are very high-performing students. And that's the unfairness of the grading system. Lima Senior gets an F in many of these categories. They've also got a kid who had a 36 on his SAT. Now, does he need to go through testing to make sure that he's ready for college? Not when a bunch of guys are offering to pay for him to go for free. So, yeah, I think this is a path we should go down and make sure to avoid, especially the cost and the hassle. The kids can be learning instead of testing. But we can't let those kids who can't read in third grade, but they're in a very good school, say, well, we won't know whether he. So there has to be some accountability even in the best of schools.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker Pro Tem Huffman and Representative Thompson. I was throwing out the idea because it will do two things. One, it rewards the high-performing schools. And two, it serves as the incentive for other schools to qualify for a waiver. Just thought. Thank you.
No questions, witnesses? It's a very special day in our household. This is my granddaughter's first preschool education day, and her mother, who was a lawyer, naturally, was helping her along with this, and I was very interested in her opening comment. She finished the Iliad with her father earlier. Her mother is now expecting, and she said, if it's a boy, you can call him Achilles. Thank you, gentlemen, for your diligence. Oh, I beg your pardon. Leader.
Thank you, and this is really just a question of protocol. This is an education bill, and we're not hearing this in education. It's exceptional that we would be in rules. In my 8 years, we've not ever done anything except set the calendar and assign bills to other committees. So can you speak a bit to why we are not in education, taking that an education bill?
Yeah, and I'll be happy to do that, Mr. Speaker and Leader Hurd. Although it is exceptional, it's not without precedent. I think I stood in this room 4 years ago, and on the redistricting bill, as the sponsor of that bill, making presentation to the Rules Committee. I'm not sure if any of the members, with the exception of Speaker Batchelder here, were on that committee or not. And I think essentially this is an exceptional circumstance for a couple of reasons. One is, as I mentioned, we have, and I'm not just pandering to the boss, an exceptional speaker, who after 30 million years or so is leaving the legislature and wants to try to get as many things done as he can. This is a time period when the speaker, or when the Representative Thompson, who's had a lot to do, was able to step forward and say, we can really get down to the brass tacks. You know, when we're here in the first 6 months of the year, it's very difficult to get a committee together 3 days in a row and have testimony. And have 6 hearings in the space of 3 weeks and bring folks up. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on this bill. Getting 19 people on the Education Committee here is hard. Some folks do it in the middle of August, and we kind of try to do this in July, and because of other schedules and things like that. And what we thought was we're going to have a smaller committee, which is education-centric. We've got several of the members of the Education Committee on the committee and members of leadership on our side of it. And of course, we have the leadership of the House on your side, and certainly the folks, I think maybe Representative Phillips is the ranking member, or was at one time of education. But obviously those folks do it too. So part of it was let's get it done. It's an important issue that a lot of people are wondering what the position of the House is, the legislature, the state. And frankly, I think this is the most nimble way to get it done. And, you know, there's always hurt feelings. You know, when I wasn't in leadership and I didn't get the committees and things that I wanted to do, I thought that's outrageous. And now that I don't get to decide, but at least I get to talk, then I don't think it's as outrageous as it used